The rain wasn't gentle that night. It came down hard, slapping the pavement like it had something to prove. Puddles formed fast in the cracks of the sidewalk, and the cold seeped through every layer of clothing like it knew exactly where to sting. Down a narrow alley behind a busy jazz club in the heart of the city, a young woman stood pressed against the brick wall, trying to stay out of the worst of it. Her coat was thin, more suited for autumn than this kind of late winter chill, and her boots had seen better days. Holes near the toes let in water with every step. She hadn't eaten since morning. A stale croissant from a bakery dumpster half wrapped in paper was the best she'd found. She'd brushed off the dirt, whispered an apology to no one in particular, and eaten it slowly, trying to make it last. Now her stomach growled again, a low, insistent reminder that she needed more. But money was gone. The last of it had gone toward a night in a shelter 3 nights ago, and since then, she'd been sleeping in 24-hour laundromats or curled up on benches in all-night diners, where no one asked questions, as long as you bought a cup of coffee. She wasn't used to this. Not really. Growing up, there'd always been music in the house, soft, steady, sometimes thunderous, but never hunger. Her father had made sure of that. Even when times got tight, even when the gigs dried up or the critics turned cruel, there was always rice in the pot and a warm blanket on the bed. And always the piano. It sat in the corner of their small living room like a silent family member, polished every Sunday, tuned twice a year without fail. Now, the piano was gone. Sold along with most everything else after the funeral. She'd kept only a few things. A faded photo of her and her dad at a summer festival, his favorite metronome, its tick-long silenced, and a binder full of handwritten sheet music, his compositions never published, never performed beyond their living room. She'd tried to find work. Waitress jobs, retail, even cleaning offices at night, but without a permanent address or references, doors kept closing. She played on street corners sometimes, but people walked by too fast to stop, dropping maybe a coin or two if they felt generous. Once, a man had offered her $50 to play something sexy outside his bar. She'd walked away without a word. Tonight, though, she'd heard the music from the club. Not just any music, real jazz, the kind with soul, the kind her father used to hum while making tea. She'd followed the sound like a lifeline, drawn to it without even thinking. When she peeked through the smudged window near the back entrance, she saw a small stage, a grand piano gleaming under soft lights, and a room full of people leaning in, listening. That's when the idea came. Not clever, not proud, just honest. She waited until a man in a stained apron came out dragging a heavy trash bag. He looked tired, his face lined with the kind of weariness that comes from long hours and little thanks. She stepped forward, careful not to startle him. "Excuse me," she said, her voice softer than she meant it to be. He turned, eyes narrowing. "Yeah, we don't give handouts here." "I'm not asking for a handout," she said quickly. She swallowed, her throat dry despite the damp air. I can play the piano. If you need someone, I'll play for food. Just a meal. That's all." He stared at her like she'd asked to borrow his car. Then he let out a short laugh, sharp, dismissive. "You play in there?" He jerked his thumb toward the club door. "Kid, that's not a bus stop bench. That's a real piano. Real players. You think you can just walk in off the street and sit down?" She didn't flinch. "I've been playing since I was 4. Yeah? And I've been flipping burgers since I was 12. Doesn't mean I can run a 5-star kitchen." He zipped the trash bag shut with a loud zip. "Look, I don't have time for this. Go find a shelter or something. We're full up anyway." He started to turn away, but she took one more step. "Please," she said, not begging, just stating it plain. "I haven't eaten all day. I just need one chance, one song. If it's bad, I'll leave. No trouble." For a second, he hesitated. Maybe it was the way she held herself. Not slouched, not pleading, just steady. Or maybe it was the quiet in her eyes that didn't match the rain-soaked, shivering girl in front of him. But then he shook his head. "Nah," he said, voice firm. "We've got a regular guy. Solid player. No room for amateurs." He paused, then added almost as an afterthought, "Besides, you don't look like you know the first thing about jazz." She didn't argue. She just nodded, stepped back into the shadows of the alley, and watched him disappear inside, the door clicking shut behind him. The rain kept falling. She leaned her head against the cold brick and closed her eyes. She thought of her father's hands, long fingers, calloused from decades of keys, always moving even when he wasn't playing. He used to say music isn't about being seen. It's about being true. She'd rolled her eyes back then, too young to understand. Now standing alone in the dark, soaked and hungry, those words felt like the only thing keeping her upright. She wasn't trying to be famous. She wasn't chasing applause. She just needed to eat. And if playing was the only thing she had left to offer, then she'd offer it. No shame in that. But no one had let her. She pulled her coat tighter and started walking, not sure where to go next. The city stretched out around her, bright and loud and indifferent. Cars honked. People laughed under umbrellas. Life went on as it always did, whether you were starving or not. Then, from inside the club, a new song began. A piano solo, smooth, confident, full of swing and swagger. She stopped walking, listened. It was good. Really good. But something was missing. Not notes, those were all there. But feeling. The kind that made your chest ache. The kind her father could pull from the keys like magic. She stood there for a long time, just listening. Rain dripped from her hair onto her shoulders. Her stomach twisted again, but she barely noticed. Because in that moment she wasn't thinking about food. She was thinking about the piano. About how it felt under her fingers. About the way a single chord could hold a whole world of sadness or joy. And she made a quiet promise to herself. She wouldn't give up. Not yet. Back in the alley, the club's back door opened again. A different man this time. Older, with a salt and pepper beard and a clipboard in hand. The manager, maybe. He spotted her right away. "You again?" he said, not unkindly, but with clear impatience. "I told you." "I know," she interrupted gently. "I'm leaving. I wanted to hear the music one more time before I went." He studied her for a long moment. Then almost to himself he muttered, "Stubborn, aren't you?" She didn't answer. She just looked at him, calm, waiting. He sighed, rubbed his temple like he had a headache. "All right, look." Benny, the guy who usually plays, he just called. "Food poisoning. Can't make it tonight. We've got a full house and I've got no pianist. My backup's out of town." He paused, eyes narrowing. "You really think you can fill in?" She didn't say yes right away. She thought about it. Really thought. This wasn't just about food anymore. This was about walking into a room full of strangers who expected something special, who expected jazz, and she'd spent her life playing Chopin, Debussy, her father's own pieces, beautiful, complex, but not exactly what you'd hear in a smoky downtown club. But music was music. And feeling was feeling. "I can try," she said. He snorted. "Try doesn't cut it in there. People paid good money." "I know," she said. "But if I'm bad, you can stop me after one song. And I'll still leave quietly. No fuss." He looked her up and down. The wet hair, the worn shoes, the quiet strength in her posture. Something in him shifted. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe, just maybe, he saw something he couldn't explain. "Fine," he said finally. "One song. You mess up, you're out. And you get a plate of whatever's in the kitchen. No promises it'll be fancy." Relief washed over her so strong it almost made her knees buckle. But she kept her face steady. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. He held the door open. "Name's Rick," he said as she passed. "And don't make me regret this." She stepped inside. The warmth hit her first. Dry air, the smell of coffee and whiskey and old wood. Then the sound, low chatter, clinking glasses, the hum of a room alive with anticipation. And then she saw it, the piano. A beautiful black Steinway, its lid open like an invitation. Her heart pounded, but not from fear. From something deeper. Something like coming home. She walked toward it, her wet boots leaving faint prints on the hardwood floor. People turned to look. Some frowned. Others whispered. She ignored them all. She sat down, placed her hands on the keys. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel hungry. She felt ready. Life hadn't always been like this, cold alleys, empty stomachs, the constant hum of worry in the back of her mind. There was a time when music filled every corner of her world, soft and steady like a heartbeat. She grew up in a small apartment above a music school, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the sound of scales and arpeggios drifted through the floorboards at all hours. But to her it wasn't noise. It was comfort. It was home. Her father wasn't flashy. He didn't wear fancy suits or give interviews. He didn't chase fame, not after a certain point. But if you knew classical piano, you knew his name. Not because he shouted it from rooftops, but because his playing left a mark. Deep, quiet, unforgettable. Critics once called his touch like moonlight on water. He'd laugh when he read that, shaking his head. "I just play what I feel," he'd say. "No magic, just honesty." She remembered sitting cross-legged on the rug beside the piano as a little girl, watching his hands move. Long fingers, strong but gentle, never rushing, always listening. He'd let her press a key now and then show her how to shape a phrase, how to breathe between notes. "Music isn't just sound," he told her once when she was maybe 6. "It's silence too, and space, and waiting." She didn't understand then, but she felt it. Like a secret only the two of them shared. They didn't have much money, but they never felt poor. There was always soup on the stove, books stacked by the window, and that old upright piano, tuned every spring, polished every Sunday. Her father taught lessons during the day to pay the bills, but at night, after she was supposed to be asleep, she'd hear him playing his own pieces, melodies he'd written but never shared with the world. She'd lie in bed, eyes closed, letting the music wrap around her like a blanket. He never pushed her to perform, never entered her in competitions. "Play for yourself first," he'd say. "If it's true for you, it'll be true for others." So she practiced not for trophies, but because it felt like talking without words. Because when her fingers found the right notes, the world made sense, even when it didn't. Then came the scandal. She was 15 when it happened. A rival pianist, jealous of her father's quiet reputation, dug up an old recording, one her father had made as a young man, full of mistakes and raw emotion, and claimed he'd plagiarized it from someone else. It wasn't true, but the accusation spread fast in the small, tight-knit world of classical music. Venues canceled his concerts. Former students turned away. The newspapers had a field day. Her father didn't fight it. He just stopped playing in public. He said the music was enough, she'd tell people later, voice quiet. He didn't need the stage, but she saw the change in him. The light in his eyes dimmed. He still played at home, still taught his students, still made her laugh with his terrible jokes about metronomes. But something had broken. Not his spirit, never that, but his trust in the world outside their door. Still, he kept teaching her. Every evening, rain or shine, they'd sit at the piano together. He'd correct her posture, show her how to shape a crescendo, how to let a note fade like a sigh. "You've got the hands," he'd say, tapping her knuckles lightly. "But more than that, you've got the ears. And the heart. That's rarer." When she turned 18, he gave her a binder. Inside were dozens of his original compositions, pieces he'd written over 30 years, never published, never performed. "These are yours now," he said. "Not to sell, not to show off, just to keep. And if the time's right, maybe share them." She hugged the binder like it was made of gold. 6 months later, he was gone. It happened fast. A sudden illness, no warning. One week he was humming while making tea. The next he was in a hospital bed, too weak to lift his head. She held his hand until the end, whispering the melody of his favorite lullaby, the one he used to play when she had nightmares. After the funeral, the silence was unbearable. The apartment felt hollow, like the walls had forgotten how to echo. Friends offered help, but she refused. She didn't want pity. She wanted to honor him the only way she knew how, by living, by playing, by carrying his music forward. But life doesn't stop for grief. Bills piled up, rent, utilities, medical debts she hadn't known existed. She sold the upright piano first, her heart breaking as strangers carried it down the stairs. Then the bookshelves. The record player, even his favorite armchair. Each item gone felt like losing a piece of him all over again. She kept only 3 things: the photo of them at the summer festival, him smiling, her missing a front tooth, the metronome, its ticking now silent, its spring rusted, and the binder of his music. She moved into a shared room in a boarding house, then a hostel, then nowhere at all. She took odd jobs, washing dishes, folding laundry, handing out flyers, but nothing lasted. People asked questions she didn't want to answer. "Where's your family? Why don't you go to college?" She'd smile politely and change the subject. At night, she'd find quiet corners, libraries before closing, church basements, even bus stations, and practice on imaginary keys, moving her fingers in the air, hearing the notes in her mind. It kept her sane. It kept her connected to him. Sometimes she'd dream of playing on a real stage again. Not for fame, not for money. Just to feel that connection, the one between her hands, the keys, and the silence in between. But dreams don't pay for food, so she kept walking, kept searching, kept hoping. She never told anyone who her father was. Not out of shame, never that, but because she didn't want to be seen as someone's daughter. She wanted to be heard for herself. To prove that the music in her wasn't borrowed, it was hers, grown from love and loss and late-night lessons in a tiny apartment above a music school. But the world doesn't care about quiet truths. It wants labels, names, stories it can package and sell. So she stayed silent, until tonight. Standing in that alley, soaked and shivering, asking for a meal in exchange for a song. It wasn't weakness. It was survival. And maybe, just maybe, it was also faith. Faith that somewhere in some dimly lit club, someone would listen not with their eyes but with their ears. Faith that music could still open doors, even when everything else had closed. She didn't know it yet, but that one request, simple, humble, almost desperate, was about to change everything. Because inside that club, behind the laughter and clinking glasses, was a piano waiting, and a room full of people who didn't know they were about to hear something they'd never forget. And she was just a girl with cold hands, an empty stomach, and a lifetime of music in her bones. But that was enough, more than enough. As she stepped through the back door, leaving the rain behind, she didn't think about her father's name or his legacy. She didn't think about the scandal or the silence that followed. She didn't even think about the sandwich she might get if she played well. All she thought was, "Let me speak." And for the first time in a long time, she had a piano to speak through. The moment she sat at the piano, the noise of the club seemed to pull back, like the room itself was holding its breath. The chatter softened. Glasses stopped clinking. Even the bartender paused mid-pour, bottle tilted, eyes drifting toward the stage. She didn't look up. She kept her gaze on the keys, ivory worn smooth by years of hands, some skilled, some not, all leaving their mark. Her fingers hovered. Cold from the rain, stiff from hunger, but steady, she took a slow breath, the kind her father taught her. Deep in the belly, not the chest. Nerves live in the throat, he used to say. Breathe past them. Then she began, not with a flourish, not with a showy run or a thunderous chord, just a single note, soft, clear, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. Then another. And another. Slowly a melody unfolded, simple at first, almost hesitant, but within seconds it deepened. It grew roots. It pulled people in. She wasn't playing jazz, not exactly. Not the kind they expected. But she wove it in, swung the rhythm just enough, bent a note here and there, let the left hand walk like a bass line in a smoky alley. The right hand sang, though, pure, lyrical, full of the classical training that lived in her bones. It was as if Chopin had wandered into a New Orleans club and decided to stay for a drink. A man near the front stopped stirring his whiskey. A woman in the back lowered her phone. Even the staff behind the bar stood still, towels forgotten in their hands. She didn't notice any of it. She was somewhere else now, back in that small apartment, the radiator hissing, her father leaning over her shoulder, whispering, "Listen to the space between the notes. That's where the truth lives." Her fingers moved faster now, not frantic but sure. She layered harmonies that shouldn't have worked in a jazz setting, but they did. They ached. They shimmered. She played a phrase her father had written the week before he got sick. A melody about waiting, about hope that doesn't shout but endures. She'd never played it for anyone, not once. But tonight it poured out of her like it had been waiting for this moment. Halfway through, she closed her eyes. And that's when the room truly fell silent. No one coughed. No one whispered. Even the ice machine in the corner seemed to pause. It was just her, the piano, and the story she was telling. One of loss, yes, but also of love that doesn't die, just changes shape. When she reached the final passage, she slowed again. Let the notes hang in the air like smoke. Then one last chord, soft, unresolved, beautiful in its longing. She lifted her hands, silence. For 3 full seconds, nothing, then applause, not polite clapping. Not the kind people do because they feel they should. This was real, loud, raw. People stood up. Someone whistled. A woman wiped her eyes without embarrassment. Back by the kitchen door, the man who'd scoffed at her just an hour ago, Rick, stood frozen, arms crossed, jaw slightly open. He'd expected noise, maybe a few clumsy chords, a quick exit. Instead, he'd just heard something that felt like it had been carved from bone and memory. He turned to the bartender. "Who is she?" The bartender just shook his head. "No idea. Said she'd play for food." Rick didn't say anything else. He just watched as the young woman stayed seated, hands resting gently on the keys, eyes still closed, as if she hadn't heard the applause at all. As if she were still listening to something only she could hear. Then slowly she opened her eyes and looked out at the room. Not with pride, not with fear, just presence, like she'd finally arrived somewhere she'd been trying to reach for a long time. A man in a tweed jacket near the front table leaned over to his friend. "That phrasing, that touch, it's familiar. Reminds me of someone." "Who?" his friend asked. The man frowned, thinking. "Can't place it. But it's got that old school soul. Like the greats." On stage, she stood up. She didn't bow, didn't smile for the crowd. She just walked quietly toward the side, head down, like she was trying to disappear again. But Rick was already moving. He stepped onto the small stage, holding up a hand to quiet the room, which wasn't hard because no one wanted to break the spell. "Wait," he said, voice rougher than he meant it to be. "You're not done." She turned, surprised. "We've got 2 more sets tonight," he said. "Benny's not coming. You stay. Play the rest of the night." She hesitated. "I don't know your set list. I don't know what people expect." "We don't need a set list," he said. "Just play, like you just did." "That's enough." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Someone called out, "Yeah, play more." She looked around at the faces, the eyes still bright with what they'd just heard. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt seen. Not as a hungry girl in wet clothes, but as someone who had something to give. She nodded. Rick clapped her lightly on the shoulder, awkward but kind, and stepped back. "And don't worry about food," he added, almost sheepish. "You'll get a proper meal and—" "Thanks." She sat back down. This time when she played, she loosened up, let herself explore. She tried a blues progression, then slipped in a Debussy prelude like it belonged. She improvised over a standard, twisting it into something new, something hers. People ordered more drinks, not to drown the music, but to stay longer, to soak it in. Between songs, she'd glance at the kitchen door, half expecting someone to stop her, to say, "Okay, that's enough." But no one did. Instead, a server brought her a plate, steaming stew, fresh bread, a cup of tea. She ate between pieces, not rushing, savoring every bite like it was a gift, which, in a way, it was. During a quiet moment, the man in the tweed jacket walked up to the stage. He didn't interrupt, just waited until she finished a gentle rolling piece that sounded like rain on rooftops. "Excuse me," he said when she looked up. "I used to write about music. For the paper. Retired now, but may I ask who taught you?" She swallowed. "My father. He play?" She nodded. "He did. A long time ago. Any chance?" "His name was Elias Moreau?" Her breath caught. She didn't answer right away. Just looked at him, eyes searching his face. He wasn't smiling. Not smug, just wondering. Like he'd just solved a puzzle that had haunted him for years. "I knew him," the man said softly. "Saw him play in '89 at the old Symphony Hall. One of the most honest performances I've ever heard. Then he vanished." She looked down at her hands. "He didn't vanish, he just—" Stepped back. The man nodded slowly. "I always wondered what happened to him. And if he had family." She didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. Just said, he believed music should be given, not sold. The man smiled, a small, sad smile. He was right, he didn't say anything else. Just stepped back into the crowd, leaving her with that quiet truth hanging in the air. She played the rest of the night with a new kind of strength. Not louder, not flashier, but deeper. Every note carried the weight of her father's silence, her own struggle, and the strange, sudden grace of being heard. When the final set ended, the crowd didn't rush out. They lingered. Some came up to thank her. Others just stood near the piano as if the music might still be floating in the air. Rick approached again, this time with a small envelope. "For tonight," he said, "and we'd like you back." "Next week, same time." She took it, surprised. "You don't even know my name," he shrugged. "Doesn't matter. I know your hands. And your ears." That's enough. She almost said no, almost walked away like she always did. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the warmth in the room. Maybe it was the memory of her father's voice saying, "Don't hide the gift." Or maybe it was just the simple fact that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. She nodded. "Okay," she said. "I'll be back." As she stepped out into the night, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the streetlights, clean and quiet. She walked slowly, the envelope in her pocket, the taste of warm bread still on her tongue. She didn't have a home to go to. Not really. But for tonight, that was all right. Because somewhere inside that club, a piano waited, and next week she'd speak through it again. Not as someone's daughter, not as a charity case, just as herself. Hungry once, but now full of music and maybe, just maybe, hope. The next few days passed in a blur that felt both unreal and deeply ordinary. She found a cheap room above a laundromat, just a cot, a sink, and a window that rattled when the dryers ran. But it was dry, and it was hers for now. She washed her one good shirt in the sink and hung it to dry over the radiator. Every morning she walked to the club early, not to perform but just to sit near the piano during the quiet hours, letting her fingers rest on the keys without playing, as if relearning their shape. Word had spread. Not wildly, not like a viral video or a tabloid headline, but the old-fashioned way, through whispers over coffee, through friends telling friends, through the kind of quiet buzz that builds when something real happens in a world full of noise. People started showing up early just to get a good seat. Some brought notebooks. Others just sat with their eyes closed, like they were at a meditation retreat instead of a jazz club. Rick, the manager, stopped calling her kid. He started nodding when she walked in, sometimes leaving a cup of tea on the piano bench before she arrived. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry. He just let her be. But then came the man in the tweed jacket again. He showed up on her third night, same seat, same quiet intensity. After her set, he waited by the side door, holding a small, worn book. When she stepped out for air, he approached. "I didn't mean to stir up ghosts," he said gently, but I couldn't unhear it. "The way you shape a phrase, the way you let silence speak. That's not something you learn from YouTube tutorials. That's lineage." She didn't answer right away. She leaned against the brick wall, arms crossed, not cold this time, but guarded. "He never wanted fame," she said finally, voice low. "Not after what happened." The man nodded. "I know, and I respected that. That's why I never wrote about him after he disappeared. But seeing you, it's like hearing his voice again, only new, like he passed the torch without anyone noticing." She looked down at her shoes. "I don't want to be known as his daughter. I want to be known for my own music." "And you are," he said. "But your music carries his soul. There's no shame in that. It's not copying. It's continuing," she didn't argue, because part of her knew he was right. Every time she played, she felt her father beside her, not as a ghost, but as a presence in the phrasing, in the patience, in the way she listened before she played. But she also knew the world didn't see it that way. The world loved labels. Daughter of would become her headline, her identity, her cage. The next day, a local blog posted a short piece. "Mystery pianist stuns downtown crowd. Is she connected to a lost legend?" They didn't name her father outright, but they dropped enough hints, trained in the classical tradition, echoes of a reclusive master from the 80s, that people started connecting dots. At the club that night, more cameras appeared. Not big news crews, just phones held high, recording her hands, her face, the piano. Someone shouted, "Are you Elias Moreau's daughter?" From the back. She froze mid-phrase. The room went quiet. She didn't answer, just kept playing, but the magic was cracked, the spell broken. She finished the song, but it felt hollow, like she was performing instead of sharing. After the set, Rick pulled her aside. "Look," he said, rubbing his temples, "I didn't want this. I just wanted good music. But now people are coming for the story, not the song." "I know," she said. "You don't have to confirm anything." He added quickly, "We can shut it down. Say it's just rumors." She shook her head. "That won't work. Once the story's out, it grows on its own." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the kitchen behind them. Then she said, "I'll keep playing. But on one condition. Name it. No mention of my father in any promotion. No posters, no social media, no interviews. Just let the music stand alone." Rick studied her. "You sure? This could be huge for you." "People would pay to hear you." That's the problem, she said. I don't want them paying to hear his ghost. I want them listening to me. He exhaled slowly. All right, your call. I'll make sure the staff knows. And I'll tell anyone who asks to mind their own business. She thanked him, but the weight didn't lift. Because she knew, once a secret is suspected, it's never really secret again. Still, she showed up the next week. Same time, same black shirt, same quiet walk to the piano. The crowd was bigger, yes, but she didn't look at them. She closed her eyes, placed her hands on the keys, and played like no one was watching. And slowly, miraculously, the room followed her lead. The phones went down. The whispers stopped. By the second song, it was just music again, the kind that doesn't need a backstory to move you. After the show, an older woman approached her near the coat rack. She had silver hair and kind eyes, and she held a small envelope. My husband and I used to go to your father's concerts, she said softly. We never met him, but his music got us through some hard years. When he stopped playing, it felt like losing a friend. She paused, then handed her the envelope. We heard you might be starting music lessons for kids. Someone mentioned it online. If it's true, we'd like to help. Inside was a check. Not huge, but enough to cover a month of rent or a stack of beginner sheet music. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. Thank you, she whispered. The woman squeezed her arm. Don't thank me. Thank you for keeping his light alive, in your own way. That night, walking home, she made a decision. She'd been saving every dollar from the gigs, eating rice and beans, skipping bus fare to walk instead. She'd planned to use the money to get back on her feet, maybe find a steady job, disappear into normal life again. But now she saw another path. Her father had always believed music wasn't for the elite. It was for anyone who needed it. He taught neighborhood kids for free when she was little, letting them bang on the keys while he laughed and said, "Noise is just music learning to speak." She remembered those kids, their wide eyes, their clumsy fingers, the joy when they finally played Twinkle Twinkle all the way through. Maybe that was her real inheritance. Not the name, not the technique, but the belief that music belongs to everyone. The next day, she found a community center with a broken-down upright piano in the basement. The director, a tired but warm woman with ink-stained fingers, listened as she explained her idea. Free piano lessons for kids who couldn't afford them. No auditions. No pressure. Just a safe place to try. We've got no budget, the director warned. I know, she said. I'll bring my own sheet music, and I'll fix the piano if I can. She spent the weekend cleaning the keys, tightening loose screws, oiling the pedals. It wasn't perfect, but it sang again. Her first student was a 9-year-old who'd never touched a piano before. Nervous, quiet, fingers hovering like they might get burned. She didn't teach scales first. She taught him to listen. Press any key, she said. Just one. Now. What does it sound like to you? He pressed middle C, thought for a moment. Like a door opening, she smiled. Then let's walk through it. Word spread at the community center, too. Soon 5 kids showed up. Then 10. She taught them chords, rhythms, how to make up their own songs. She didn't mention her father. Didn't talk about stages or critics or legacies. She just showed them how to find their own voice in the keys. Back at the club, she kept playing. But now when she sat at the piano, she didn't just play for herself or for the audience. She played for the kid who said a note sounded like rain, for the girl who wrote a song about her dog, for the boy who finally smiled when he played his first blues progression. And slowly, the story about her father faded into the background. Not because people forgot, but because her music became strong enough to stand on its own. One night after a particularly quiet, moving set, Rick handed her a letter. Came for you, he said. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with neat handwriting. You play like someone who's been lost and found. That's the rarest kind of musician. Keep going. And thank you for remembering what matters. It wasn't signed. But she knew. She folded the letter carefully and put it in her binder, right next to her father's compositions. She wasn't hiding anymore. But she wasn't hiding behind his name either. She was just playing. And that was enough. Months passed, and the rhythm of her life settled into something that felt less like survival and more like purpose. Mornings were spent at the community center, teaching kids how to press keys without fear. how to listen to the music inside them before trying to make it outside. Afternoons were for practice, sometimes on the club's grand piano during quiet hours, sometimes on the old upright at the center, its notes slightly out of tune but full of heart. Evenings belonged to the stage where she played not to prove anything, but simply because the music asked to be heard. The crowds at the club never shrank. If anything, they grew, not with gawkers chasing a rumor, but with people who came for the feeling. Regulars arrived early, claiming their favorite seats like old friends returning to a shared ritual. Newcomers stayed late, lingering over coffee long after the last note faded, as if afraid the silence might swallow the magic whole. No one shouted questions about her past anymore. They'd learned. The music spoke for itself. Rick stopped worrying about the story. He'd even taken down the old marquee that once advertised live jazz tonight and replaced it with just 2 words. Listen here, no names, no hype. Just an invitation. One Friday, the place was packed tighter than usual. Not because of a special event, just because it was Friday and people needed beauty after a long week. She walked on stage in her usual simple black top, no makeup, hair pulled back. She nodded to the room, sat, and began not with a song but with silence. Then a single chord, warm, open like sunlight through a window. She played a new piece that night, one she'd been working on for weeks. It started soft, like footsteps in snow, then built into something richer. A conversation between sorrow and hope, between memory and tomorrow. Halfway through, she wove in a melody her father used to hum while making tea on rainy mornings. Not as a tribute, not as a quote, but as a thread in a larger tapestry. Her own now, stitched with her hands, her choices, her scars. When she finished, the room didn't erupt in applause right away. People just sat, eyes glistening, breath held. Then slowly, one by one, they rose. Not out of habit, but out of respect. Even Rick, standing by the bar with his arms crossed, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and clapped harder than anyone. After the set, she stepped outside for air. The city hummed around her. Taxis, distant laughter, the low thrum of life moving forward. She leaned against the brick wall, the same spot where she'd once asked for a meal in exchange for a song. Now her pockets held more than enough for dinner. But that wasn't what filled her. A voice broke the quiet. That last piece? Was that yours? She turned. It was the man in the tweed jacket standing a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets. Yes, she said. It had his voice in it, he said gently. But it was yours, she nodded. He taught me how to speak. But I had to find my own words, he smiled. You did. And you're sharing them well. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then he said, There's talk of a small festival next spring. Local artists. Real music, no gimmicks. They'd love to have you, she hesitated. Festivals meant crowds, press, maybe even interviews. But then she thought of the kids at the community center. The ones who now played simple songs with pride, who believed music wasn't just for the rich or the famous. Only if I can bring my students, she said. Let them play too. The man's eyes lit up. I'll make sure they have a stage. She thanked him, and he walked off into the night, leaving her alone again with the city and her thoughts. Back inside, Rick was clearing glasses behind the bar. He looked up as she entered. You okay? Yeah, she said. Better than okay. He nodded, then slid a plate toward her. Leftover stew from the kitchen, still warm. Eat, you've earned it. She sat at the bar, not the piano, and ate slowly. Around her, the club emptied, chairs stacked, lights dimmed. But the feeling remained, like the room was still humming with the music she'd left behind. The next week, she told the kids about the festival. Their eyes widened. One boy asked, Will people really listen to us? People listen when you're honest, she said. And you've all been honest with your music. They practiced harder after that. Not to impress, but to be ready. She taught them how to breathe before playing, how to recover from a wrong note without panic, how to end a song like you mean it. On the night of the festival, the outdoor stage was lit by string lights and surrounded by folding chairs filled with families, friends, strangers. Her students went first, nervous but proud. One played a simple scale with such focus it brought tears to a mother's eyes. Another played a short blues riff they'd written about their pet cat. The crowd clapped not out of pity but genuine delight. Then she played, not as a star, not as a legend's daughter, just as their teacher, as someone who'd been lost and found and now wanted to light the way for others. Afterward, a little girl tugged her sleeve. Can I play like you someday? You already are, she said, kneeling down. Every time you try, you're playing like me. Like your own self. The girl beamed. Later, back at the club, Rick handed her an envelope. From the festival organizers, he said. Donation. For the lessons. Inside was enough to keep the program running for 6 months. She didn't spend it on herself. She bought new sheet music, fixed the wobbly bench at the center, even hired a retired music teacher to help with theory on Saturdays. Her life wasn't glamorous. She still lived in the room above the laundromat. She still mended her socks and cooked simple meals. But now when she walked down the street, kids waved from windows. Parents thanked her at the grocery store. And every time she sat at a piano, she felt not pressure but peace. One evening, during a quiet set, she paused between songs and looked out at the room. Saw Rick leaning against the wall, arms crossed but smiling. Saw the tweed jacket man nodding along. Saw a young couple holding hands, eyes closed, lost in the music. Saw a teenager in the back, scribbling in a notebook, maybe lyrics, maybe dreams, and she knew this was her legacy. Not a famous name, not a headline, but this, a room full of people feeling less alone because of a few notes played with truth. She dedicated her final song that night to the man who taught me that hunger, for food or for beauty, can lead you home. No one in the room knew exactly who she meant, but they felt it. And that was enough. After the last chord faded, she stood, bowed slightly, and walked off stage, not with fanfare but with quiet grace. Outside, the city breathed around her, indifferent and alive. But she wasn't cold anymore. She wasn't hungry. She wasn't invisible. She was exactly where she was meant to be, carrying forward a love of music not as a monument, but as a gift, passed hand to hand, heart to heart, and somewhere, she liked to think, her father was listening, not with pride, but with peace, knowing the music hadn't ended. It had just found a new voice.